Well, if folks are just joining us on Facebook Live, we have been doing our pre-show chatter, always about interesting things. So I just want to welcome people to Wildflowers Live. Every week we get together at 10 o'clock in the morning on Sundays, and we read a little bit from one of the stories from my book, Wildflowers in Present Tenses, and we talk about some of the wider themes that come up in these stories and how they relate to all of us. And so it really ends up being fascinating conversations that we have. So I always look forward to this. And I'm going to introduce by the way, I'm Patricia Lucia, author of Wildflowers in Present Tenses. Sometimes I forget to introduce myself, which is interesting. But if you have not already bought my book and you would like to purchase my book, the best way to buy it is on my website. You'll get 15% off, and that's pattyluciawrites.com. And you can get 15% off, and you can add an additional 10% off if you subscribe to my newsletter. So you'll get 25% off if you go to my website and get my newsletter, sign up for my newsletter. So I want to introduce my co-host, who I love and adore so much. We've had our own journey, and I am blessed to have her in my life, and of course to have her here with me and with all of you every Sunday morning. Taylor Callahan. What's up, girl? Say something. You are muted. See, I give you such a great introduction and then you mute yourself. What's up with that?
If only you could do that in real life.
What's that?
I know my husband would like to. Mute me?
Mute you, yeah.
I'm sure you occasionally want to mute me as well.
No, not really. I've never really felt that way.
Well,
no, you kind of make me giggle, and every once in a while roll my eyes, but
yeah,
I think we kind of,
yeah.
Well, we talked about this last week, how we've been, we've had so many lifetimes together that we just kind of like, yeah, that's Taylor. Yeah, that's
so
Patty.
Now my new saying is we're older than bones.
We're older than bones. Yeah, we used to say that we're older than dirt.
Appalachia.
Yeah, we're older than bones.
Yeah.
So introduce yourself, girl. Prego.
I'm Taylor. I am really big and pregnant. I'm only halfway there. We don't know. We don't have a name.
I'm saying girl.
We don't know the gender. I'm struggling with that currently. But I come to sit by the fire with Patti and kind of go through these stories with her and relate to them. And it's healing for me. It's healing for her. It's healing for we. So welcome to that journey.
It's healing for all the pronouns. This show includes all the pronouns.
That's right.
Whichever ones you choose.
Right.
Yes, and I love the imagery of sitting by the fire, because for those of you who are familiar with the book, that is literally what happens. A crone sits by the fire and introduces each story and then tells it, and she is wild and wise and magical, and she is my imagined future self. So I think about her every day and endeavor to live into her as I go along. So thank you for that, Taylor. So here we are. It's another Sunday morning, and we are going to read excerpts from Like Water. And I was struggling with what to call this show. I try to come up with these fancy, like these catchy titles, and it's kind of hard because the stories often touch on several themes all at once. And so this is definitely a story about what I called junior high, but now it's called middle school. And the things that were coming up for me during middle school that had to do with blossoming awareness of sexuality, of class, of race, and so many things. And so I kind of I kind of imagine them as little itches. You get an itch, and it comes into your awareness, and it's there, and it kind of increases in intensity until you have to do something about it. And I feel like so I called the show Discovery of Itches, because because I love that show, Discovery of Witches. But I also really think that the middle school age, that period
Oh man.
of our lives, that's really the discovery of these kinds of itches, our awareness of these kinds of things coming into the experience of our lives.
I started really early, so a lot of my edges came through in elementary school. I
Yeah.
have to say, it's definitely different. Uh, I was, fairly young, and growing up in Lake Worth, you kind of have to grow up a little faster. It was
Yeah.
just, you were much more aware of class, of um, race. Um, it's such a beautiful melting pot of a place, Lake Worth.
Well, did you have the experience of this real shift in awareness when you went from your elementary school into middle school and into this broader community that brought
So
kids from
it was a
everywhere?
cultural change for me completely.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, like I said, I had kind of started going through phases fairly young. So in fifth grade, coming out of fifth grade, I was really goth, um,
That's right. You went through your
very.
goth period early.
I went through a really early goth period. Like, I feel bad for my fifth grade teachers. I got suspended in the fifth grade for wearing a shirt that said, "I am the god of fuck." That I snuck in my backpack. My mother would have killed me. She was pissed.
That's so
Um,
awesome.
I did it in fifth grade, and then would show up to like Girl Scout meetings with like black lipstick and dog collars, and they were like, "What is going on at Taylor's house?" She is, you know. I had an older guy friend, Robert Shields. Never forget him. He said to me in the summer of fifth grade, first time I ever, you know, um, dabbled in marijuana. I was young. I didn't have a lot of, parental supervision. But he was like, "You can't show up to Lakewood Middle School like that." And I was like what? And he's like, "You're going to get your ass beat if you show up to Lakewood Middle School, wearing all black and sporting this look and having that be your persona, because it's a different world." And at first I was like, nah. I think I got jumped for the first time, and I was like, okay, I guess I'm gonna like branch out a little. Um, and before sixth grade was over, I had, completely changed the music I listened to, the people I hung out with. My whole life had changed because I had to like mold to fit this new existence, you
Mm.
know. Um, Lake Worth is a very difficult place to grow up for young people, and things happen really fast. Um,
Mhm.
so I'm grateful for all of those experiences because
For the
they made me who
experience.
I am. I have a rough edge and can fight back if I need to. Um, but back, I love this story because you didn't, welfare was not something to be talked about, or like being in a lower class was not, it was frowned upon, as to where when I grew up, it was everybody.
Mm.
And the only ones that really stuck out were the ones that were above that,
Mhm.
and they had their own clique. And the majority of us were like, well, hell with them.
Mhm. Yeah, I think it's it's interesting because I think part of what, and I don't fault them for this. I think that many parents did, but like the part of what my parents did was teach us the delusion that we were somehow middle class because because they owned the house they lived in.
Right.
And we were not middle class at all. We were,
I was
had
very
just,
clear to me that we were not, you know.
yeah,
But for
yeah,
you, you guys had this picture painted for you that, you know,
right.
you were supposed to dress a certain way and behave a certain way, and act, you know,
Yeah.
act as such.
And it was that transition from elementary school, which was a neighborhood school, right? Warner School was a little elementary school that had been built on an old farm that Mr. Warner used to own, and so the
Wow.
elementary school was named after him. As a matter of fact, Mr. Warner was still living when I was going to, we would walk a mile to our elementary school through our neighborhood, through the streets, and then we'd get to Warner School. And he owned a little candy store just outside the school grounds. And we would stop there and buy candy for school on our way. And he was this really bent over old, crusty man with thick glasses, and always had like half of a cigar in his mouth that he was just kind of chewing on, right? And he sold newspapers and candy and who knows what else behind the counter, but we always, and I would buy little nickel devil dogs for my snack for lunch. I had a nickel whenever I had a nickel. I'd go to Mr. Warner's store and get that. So his family, our school was named after him. So it was still somewhat rural. But Springfield itself was a working class town in decline even then. So when we moved from this neighborhood school where you can kind of hide your poverty in some way, and then you move into the middle school, where there was then everything becomes more clear. So class issues become clear. It's much more of a melting pot, so you have all kinds of children of color there and all different backgrounds and everything. And it was fascinating. It was a fascinating time to be there, in the early 70s, to be in middle school. So it was really quite an experience for me. So by the time I got into middle
Wow.
school, I mean, I had always been like, the Vietnam War was going on. I hated it. I didn't understand why my parents were pro-war. I never understood. Like from the time I was young, I was like, why are we at war again? So I always had those sensibilities, like, that's not, war is not cool. Why are we doing this? Um, and also to get into junior high, and there's still a lot of the residue of the 60s still in the air, the kind of the upheaval and chaos and kind of unsettledness of the 60s still moving into the 70s. So kind of growing up and coming of age during that time was kind of fascinating and confusing,
I
so
bet.
and then coming into my own sexuality. So I had already kind of fallen in love with melody when I was 9 years old, like I talked about in that other story. And but now, puberty has come, and
Hmm.
these kinds of sensibilities are becoming stronger and more clear, so uh that's kind of when I began to become a bit more aware of my sexuality, and I would have to say pretty terrified of it as well. Um,
Yeah.
so there was that, and then there were the class issues in that my father painted houses for a living, and so there was always this seasonal kind of uh, you know our financial situation was seasonal, so in the warmer months when he had stuff to paint and the weather was good for painting, there was money, and we would eat better and we had more, we were able to go on vacations and do fun stuff. And then when the winter came, we struggled through the winter, on tuna casseroles and lima bean casseroles, and my father didn't have work, and things got worse during the winter economically. So we had this kind of ebb and flow kind of economy in our household, where it was like we were okay, um, doing okay in the warmer months, and then in the winter months it was a struggle. So it made the holidays very, very stressful in my household.
Yeah,
So
because you had to keep the show going, you know.
yeah, yeah, and the show couldn't, so that's when, that's when more drinking happened. That's when the worst violence happened. That's when, those kinds of traumatic events happened, was during,
Relatable.
absolutely, during the winter months. I want to just say, I want to just say, once again, a warm welcome to Julie Seaver, who is the CEO of our local Compass Community Center. It's always such a pleasure to have her in our presence. The quiet one, as always, nice to have your quiet presence with us, quiet one. Robin, so nice to have you with us again. And
Hi, Robin.
thank you for joining us. Anoki is not joining us this morning because her family has surprised her, come into town, and they are all in her home helping to celebrate her birthday early today. So
I love that.
I'm very
that
happy.
Aquarian star.
That
we
Aquarian.
love you.
We love you, dear Aquarian sister. So
See,
she'll be
that's
listening.
why Peyton and her get along so well, because their birthdays are a day apart.
Yeah. So at any
Well,
rate,
why don't we start with the crown? And you
Yeah.
just kind of, the crown is my favorite part. I love
Yeah.
the crown.
Okay. Now, and I've been told by more than one person, and they know who they are, that they like best when you read. So I was thinking, thank you very much. You know who
I
you
just laughed
are.
like my mom. It's scary.
Yeah. So at any rate, that's okay. That's
Do you want me
okay.
to read the crown?
Well, I was
always read
thinking
the
I can read the crone, and then you
Okay.
can, like, the parts of the story that we that we
I'm not
select. You can read.
prepared to yet embody the crown, Patty.
Yeah, and I'm still working on it. So
Don't rush me. Okay.
okay, so by the way, I had my first experience with being invited to a book group this past week, who had read my book, and then they invited me to their meeting after they had finished the book. And I was a little, the having the crone and the fairies in here, I was a little nervous about. I'm like, oh boy, this is kind of weird, and it turns out that all audiences of all ages have been really loving the crone and the fairies. And I actually had one of the women in this book group say that she thought that it was the fairies who set the tone for each story. And I thought, how astute of you. So it's such a wild experience to have my book read to by book clubs, and then be invited to their meeting. And so if there's anyone here, yeah, so much fun. So again, if anyone listening belongs to a book club or knows of a book club, I would really be honored to pop in on a meeting. If the book club chooses my book to read, I would be more than happy to jump in on those meetings. They're so much fun. So at any rate,
it's a great opportunity to get to be a part of something that not many authors get to be a part of, and then also for the readers to have such an in-depth look and a personal, it changes the whole spectrum.
Absolutely. And the questions are really, are really
I
fascinating. It's really,
bet you
really
get some
fascinating.
good questions.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. So that was a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to doing more of those. So I'm going to introduce, I'm going to read the crone part. In the crone, obviously, the crone introduces each story. And again, from the perspective of being somewhere off in the future, looking back on her younger self and the moment that this story was written. So it's really looking back in retrospect
Yeah.
at the story and at her younger self. And by the way, and she's sitting by the fire with the fairies, sharing these stories. The crone picks up a handful of dirt and throws it on the fire, an offering for her next story and a signal to the fairies that the story is more of earth than fire. She pulls an old brown lunch bag from the folds of her poncho. The writing is small and in different colored ink. I learned the rules of this world from my parents, who thought the rules they were taught applied to their children, she says. The rules did not help them much either. I knew they were lying anyway. She is quiet for a while. The fairies fidget. So, the old woman continues, I found myself and my truths in dirt. I was 13. It's kind of interesting. The story is called Like Water, but she finds her truths in dirt. Um, the two are connected, of course.
Yeah, because they are both of earth. You know,
Mm-hmm.
the
Mm-hmm.
water is just as much a part as the
Absolutely.
dirt. Uh, and they both put out fire. So this is a more down grounded childhood story. I wish I had connected with the dirt a little sooner as a child.
Really?
Uh,
You're so
yeah,
connected
I was
to,
more connected to the water back then. I mean, not that that was a
oh
bad
yeah,
thing, but
ocean, yeah. But
yeah,
you're such a dirty girl. I mean,
I really am.
I mean, you're
I
such
love.
a you dirt and moss and trees and soil and
I didn't
forest.
even know I was a forest witch. I mean,
Yeah, you really are. You're quite a forest fae there, girl.
mhm, mhm. And so I guess I'm like the fidgety little fairy because that's just who I've always kind of
That's
embodied in my spirit.
that's
My
right.
personality is that much of, which is really funny because somebody actually thought that I was in the story,
Yes.
and we
Yes.
laughed about that because
Mhm.
someone thought that I was one of Patty's fae,
Mhm.
sitting with the crone.
Yeah. She was like, "I don't understand. You're telling you the stories to Taylor by a fire?" And it's like,
uh,
"Wow, that's
well,
interesting."
so apparently I'm a fairy to everyone, not just to
Yes,
myself. Yeah.
that's right.
So in this story, Patty, just kind of set the tone here. You are living in Springfield. Springfield is quietly falling apart behind the scenes.
Mm.
Families are struggling, and your dad has chosen to take you uh, to go sell some vegetables roadside,
Right,
um,
right.
which I think is interesting. Mother of multiple children, that you spend the alone time with each child, and that he would take you to go do this
Well, I think
alone.
I honestly think I was the only one of his children who was willing to do it.
Who would go with him?
Yeah, I was the only one willing to go.
And perhaps
Yeah.
he just kind of wanted to be the one that was getting attention for once, and you knew that this was an opportunity to do so.
Yeah, yeah, I think so. I mean, I often had those experiences with my father. Like, he was not a very fatherly father.
Right.
And he had, there was probably one of his children he liked out of the five of us, and kind of poured his affections on her, and everybody else was just a little, fell short.
I
And
just
um,
don't understand that. That's an odd parenting.
that was that was his own character flaw. I mean, like, he just,
Yeah.
I think he was one of those men who loved the idea of having children, but had no idea how to be a father. None
Yeah.
whatsoever. It was still very, very old school. He was Italian, very, very old school. So his children, just as his wife, were his property.
Mhm.
We were his property. Carried his name, and we were his property. But having a real relationship with his children was not something my father um, did, unfortunately. And so there was me so part of this was, well, I wanted the $10 he was going to pay me, because
Mhm.
I had my own plans, right, for that
Mhm.
$10, which comes out in the story. And also wanting to be approved of by my father. See,
Right.
this is what I can do. I have a purpose. I can serve a purpose here. I have value. You see, I have value.
Look at me. Look at what I can
Look
do.
at me. This
Yeah.
is what I can do. Look how,
I'm
and
capable.
yeah. So I was the only one of his children that would go to paint jobs with him too. Like, I learned how to paint. I learned the skill of painting, but I was the only one of his children that actually volunteered to go on paint jobs with him, you know. So that was just, I was kind of more like a son, but and I
Mhm.
felt like that was kind of the role that I played, because I was very, I was like non-binary, even though we didn't use those terms back then. But I was a non-binary daughter who
Mhm.
kind of functioned more like a son, but not recognized as such by my father.
Right.
So I didn't get any of the accolades that would be poured on a son. But I did a lot of the things that a son would have done with his father. Yeah.
Mhm.
Interesting. So, yeah. And that kind of ties in with, some of the kind of the blossoming awarenesses of sexuality and
Yeah.
sexual and such. Yeah.
Definitely played a role in that.
Do you want?
Yeah, I just want to read a couple things.
Okay.
Um, so you discussed a little bit about, you know, uh, what's kind of been going on. You're selling potatoes, onions, and peanuts from the back of the truck. Um, so I'm just going to read a couple of these paragraphs here. Dad is a painter and would be painting today if there was something to paint. But construction has stopped in Springfield. No more new apartment complexes and department stores, no more home remodeling. The town creeps along in a kind of shock that comes just before depression, I think. I see it on Dad's face, and I see it on the faces of the people who come to us for potatoes and onions because we're cheaper than the food warehouse down the street. So, it kind of sets the tone for the struggle. Um, I'm going to skip forward a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Winters are harder now. They were hard when Dad was painting, but now it's worse. He had money in the warm months when Dad painted, or we. Mom shopped at Stop and Shop and bought pork chops and big family packs when Dad got paid. Sometimes chuck steak. Mom froze vegetables and meat so we could get through winter without having to eat lima bean and tuna casseroles. We don't go to Stop and Shop anymore. Mom says the register people are rude now because she uses food stamps. We shop at the warehouse now, and Mom says it's friendlier, but she doesn't like the smell of the place and the sawdust in the aisles. So you had really experienced a little bit of class separation and it had become obvious, even to the kids, but they were still trying to portray,
Yeah.
this middle classness and, uh, fact that,
Yeah. And even when things were good, we ate pork chops and chuck steak. Like that chuck steak was like this really
yeah,
big treat, but
yeah,
people who know steak know that
hmm,
that's that's not a fillet.
yeah,
That's a chuck steak, right? So
yeah,
even then, yeah. So yeah, there were these and again it always seems seasonal, so in the summer we kind of live this way, in the winter we live that way. Yeah.
yeah. And then there was a time where your dad came home with boxes of government cheese.
Mhm.
Uh,
Yeah,
it's a great,
you want to
it's
read
a
that?
great part. Dad comes home with boxes of government cheese, powdered milk, and big cans of chopped chicken and peanut butter. Pour the oil off the top, Mom says as Andrew opens the peanut butter. That oil's bad for you. Andrew pours half the oil off and mixes in the rest. Makes it smoother, he whispers to little Ron. Dad said he gets the food from a friend who works at the welfare office. It's a shame to waste the stuff, he says. Are we on welfare? Diana asks. No, Dad says. We're not poor. Mom nods in agreement. Diana breathes again, and we all sigh. We're not poor, we whisper. Thank God. You were getting free lunch at school and
Hmm.
were objectified by having, lunch tickets. And I just think it's wild because I didn't know a kid in middle school who had cash to pay for lunch. We were all on welfare, all of us,
Hmm.
you know.
Hmm.
Uh, but as a parent, I remember going to WIC, and WIC now is a card that you slide. But
Right.
when I started WIC with my first child, they were checks that had to be specific ounces and specific weights and specific brands of specific foods, and it never made sense by the time you got to the register. And people would get so mad. The cashier would be upset. The people behind me would be upset. And that was the only time I really felt like what I think your mom was feeling.
Hmm. That's
I'm just trying to feed my kids, but it's
right.
got to feel so like I'm so pressured by this.
Yeah.
And it's not really fair because, we're all living.
Hmm.
I'm just trying to live here. Um, but socially, it hits you. It hits you.
Yeah.
Even in their circles, I'm sure,
And in whose circles? My mother's?
and your mother and father,
Oh yeah.
like,
Yeah. Well, they were very much wanting to present as a middle class suburban family. But
right.
as I got a little older and started hanging out with friends, I realized that there was quite a difference between their homes, their middle class
Hmm.
homes, and my home. There was
Yeah. Yeah.
and there was a lot of shame associated with living in a more working class home. And so there was the nervousness, for instance, about bringing friends to visit my house,
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
because it wasn't like theirs. So.
For me, it was either one way or the other. Like I had friends come over that kind of felt that way about me, and I was very low class. And then
Hmm.
there were friends that lived in big houses over on Palmway, and we were like, they had pools and extra
Hmm.
bedrooms, and we were like, what?
Hmm.
Which you talk about a little bit as well.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
so you had kind of seen it that day that your lunch tickets were stolen um, by a friend, Colleen, or I don't know if she was necessarily a friend then.
Yeah, she was a girl I knew in junior high, and it was, I was never a pocketbook girl. I really just should never have carried a pocketbook because I was always putting them in the wrong place, not, forgetting them or whatever. I wasn't like my sister. I heard pocketbooks, by the way, are more of a Sagittarian thing. I'm not sure about that, but I,
Not when I was a kid, but as an adult, I'm like the biggest purse possible.
yeah. And I have always been like, I, fuck up with purses all the time. I leave them places. I hang them in the wrong place, whatever. I'm not a good purse. I shouldn't have a pocketbook or a purse, but there's times when you need it. But anyway, in junior high, of course, I'm junior high, right? So, there's the menstrual cycle. There's the, I see you, Taylor. There is the, there are the reasons why, a girl might need a pocketbook. And so, I had those reasons. So what did I keep in my pocketbook? Maybe I kept a comb and I kept a sanitary napkin and I kept my lunch, my lunch tickets, my free lunch tickets. And on this particular day, Taylor, on this particular day, um, this silly boy pulls out my lunch tickets and decides to dangle them in the air. And so then there's this moment where I could tell the teacher, I could say, "Hey, Mr. Flink, Kevin took my lunch tickets," but I don't because I'm humiliated by the fact that I have lunch tickets in the first place. So
Yeah.
yeah.
And then let's talk about Leisha.
Leisha. Yeah, Leisha.
Leisha. Yeah.
Leisha. All right.
So
Another thing that goes on in
how
junior
did you
high.
become? Yeah. How did you become friends with her? You stopped a girl from throwing food at her.
Yeah. Now, Leisha and I kind of knew of each other because we were in the same homeroom. Our names are one letter apart.
Yeah.
So
Lucio and Lucia.
right. So she always sat right behind me in homeroom. So we were aware of each other. And then and then there was the incident where the girls were picking on her, obviously because Leisha had these enormous breasts and a small waist, and she just was the envy of most girls. While most of the boys, lusted after her, and some of the teachers. Let's be honest. And so there were some girls who kind of wanted to throw food at her in the cafeteria one day, and I kind of came to her rescue. Yeah. And so we were,
Well, that's something I did a lot in middle school.
yeah,
I was like,
intervene on
this
fights.
tiny little thing, but I love to get in a fight. I mean, in fact, I went back to the sixth grade. I had failed the sixth grade due to misbehavior and what was going on at home, not because of intelligence or,
Right.
was for non-attendance. Was promoted back to seventh grade because, obviously I didn't belong repeating.
Mm-hmm.
And I was on a contract that said I couldn't get in any trouble. And one of my dearest friends had just had her appendix out, and I knew they were going to jump her in the gym room. And this is kind of how it was. It was like she was Puerto Rican and I was white, and we, were, too hood for, a certain group of girls.
Girls from the hood. Mm-hmm.
They went to, they were whooping her bad when I came into the locker room, and I knew that my status in the seventh grade depended on it, but I pulled these girls off of her and assisted in the battle, and so I went back to sixth grade for it. But to this
that was a
day,
big
I would
sacrifice.
do it all over again.
Yeah,
it was, but I would do it again today.
Yeah, got to do what you got to do. Yeah.
So really relatable.
Mm-hmm.
So you go to Leisha's house and realize kind of that there's a big gap.
Yeah, that was
as far as social status goes.
Yeah, I mean, Leisha had it was is I had never been, and I don't think I ever have been since then in a house, gone into a house that was so white, like everything was white, the carpets were white, everything was white.
Was
They
she an
had,
only child?
yes, yes, she
Hmm.
was, and as far as I knew, she was an only child. She was the only person. She was the only child in that house, and so she had her own bedroom, and her bedroom had white shag carpet, and it was just really cute. And she had all of these really cool things in her bedroom. She actually had her own television in her bedroom, which was unbelievable. Like, how is that even possible?
And
Um,
you just kind of played it cool. You're like, oh yeah, that's cool. Hmm.
I
Because you were like blown away.
hmm Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, there was a fair amount of awkwardness in my friendship with Leisha because I also was attracted to her in ways, and yet uh, didn't know what to do about that. I was kind of terrified of my, of my own inclinations, my own, feelings towards her.
Mm.
And we kind of what, you know, it was more, the boys and the men made note of her body, and so did I.
Mhm.
But I was very much on the down low about my observations.
Mhm.
I didn't, I
Yeah.
never, I part of, I never let it
I think
show.
part of why was, such great friends with you is you were one of the girls who didn't have jealousy towards her. It was something else.
Right.
Even if she couldn't pinpoint what that something else was, or perhaps she did know. You never know.
You never know.
But uh, it was more comfortable for her
Mm-hmm.
to hang out with you than other girls. She couldn't hang out with guys, so
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
you were the closest thing she had to
Yeah.
a guy friend, or
And
to
yeah,
a friend that was non-judgmental of her.
yeah, and I think it's like a classic extrovert introvert kind of friendship too.
Yeah.
There are a lot, so she was more of an extrovert and I was an introvert during that time, and so there is that classic, and I am sure if people think about it, like if they're classic extroverts, how many friends do they have that are introverts? And
Exactly.
and that does happen a lot. So I think that it was a lot of that too. She was an extrovert who really, I was quiet, I was thoughtful, I was a very deep thinker during that time, even though I didn't say a lot about what I was thinking. I was always observing things and
Hmm.
thinking about them. And there was something about that Leisha found comfortable to be around. Yeah.
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 She may have been comfortable, but you were sacrificing your comfortable place to be friends with her on occasion. I think that you had realized at this point that you were different,
Mhm.
and that you kind of felt about Leisha the way that the boys felt about Leisha,
Yeah. Like,
except you were ashamed of it,
I
and they
was
were open about it.
I was ashamed. Yeah. So there's this scene that becomes absolutely clear when she takes me to the beach.
Yeah.
Do
Um,
you want to read that? Because I think that's kind of funny, actually.
yeah.
In retrospect, at the time it was terrifying, but um, and I really do think that the some of the stuff that's really relatable about that is that when we are first experiencing our budding sexuality, we are often confused by it, and hold on, we are often confused by it, and we are terrified by it, and sometimes
Hmm.
we feel shame about it. There are
Hmm.
all of these things that are going on, and a lot of that I think happens for junior high school kids. Like, I was listening to a conversation that a woman was having about her gay son, where when he was in junior high, it was very challenging for him. He didn't want to be in junior high. And in some ways, even though she knew he was gay, he didn't know yet. he was still, confused, and he had a really cool mom. you know this is like a really, really cool mom. But so I think even if you put aside the parental, like what our parents think about it, I think in like our own individual journeys as we
Yeah,
are discovering our sexuality can be confusing in and of itself, and we can have
absolutely.
now, yes, we learned about shame and judgment in all of those exterior places, but by the time we're, in middle school, we have internalized those attitudes. And so if we're discovering those things about ourselves, then we are struggling on our own, and
Hmm.
sometimes that struggle has nothing to do with what mom might say or what dad might say, but our own internal journey towards kind of accepting ourselves. No.
Absolutely.
So yeah, so there's this scene where that kind of comes to a head in this story with that kind of dynamic between Leisha and I, and it happens on a beach on a foggy day when she has taken me to the beach. Yeah.
So she says, "Do you want to see my bathing suit?" Alicia says. I shrug and hope she doesn't open her shirt. I am terrified of Alicia's breasts, terrified to look at them, terrified that my face and eyes will give me away, and Alicia will see that I look at her breasts the way the boys do. Only I am ashamed. Alicia stands knee deep in the surf and unbuttons her shirt. She is stripping for me, and I want to run from where I stand. I try my best to look bored as she opens her shirt. Ta-da! She says, "Don't you think it's cute?" "It's nice," I say, turning away from Alicia,
Turning.
from Alicia's breasts and the small orange triangles of her string bikini. I squint into the mist and find a seagull to study.
Yeah,
So
like
you
my
just
best
tried your best to play it cool, man.
Yeah, like my best friend was like a Baywatch babe,
Yeah,
at
yeah.
like 13, 14 years old. I'm like, are you, honestly, really? Honestly, like
And
Baywatch, like orange string bikini with these, I swear they were like double D's or they were like somewhere into the middle of the alphabet size breast. I mean, really
and
now.
even if you had been super girly,
Yeah.
would your parents have let you leave the house and not bathing suit?
Are you, oh, and like me wearing a bathing suit
Yeah,
like
or
that?
your sisters. Yeah,
Oh, hell no. No,
no.
no,
And
no.
so she just lived a whole different life than you did. Her parents are very different from yours. And so she
Yeah,
had
and
much more freedom to express who she was.
yeah, and they might have been parents who weren't really paying attention either. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
it's hard to know. I mean, I often thought later on, because there were things that she had and things that she had access to that I was like, where does this come from? And because she was Italian, I was thinking, oh, like later on I thought, oh, well,
Hmm.
maybe maybe their family was connected in ways that my Italian family was not. you know. So,
Absolutely.
yeah, kind of interesting. Um, and you want to jump into kind of like some of the, I know we talked a little bit about the class stuff that comes up, and this budding sexuality, and then there's also like race. And going into a middle school, there were so many people of color in this middle school, um and I loved them. I loved being around them. And yet there were these separations, like these natural separations, like how, because even though, I mean, it wasn't, we weren't segregated, but there was kind of almost like a cultural segregation. Like the white
Absolutely.
girls, The white girl sat at their lunch table. The black girl sat at their lunch table. The Latino girl sat at their lunch table. And I often felt like I wanted to be over there or over there, you know, and on one table, I probably wouldn't have understood the language. And on another table, you know, why, what would I,
Those were
what
the
would,
years that I realized I was a chameleon, and I was the girl in the cafeteria that would jump tables.
uh, yeah.
I had to understand the lingo that my brown sisters were talking about. I wanted to sit with them. I lived in the hood too. I knew what they were talking about. My
Mm-hmm.
mom was like their mom.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I wanted to vibe with them. And I
Right.
think that that's why my crew got in a lot of trouble with the majority because we like broke the mold. You know,
Yeah.
this white ghetto white girl with this Boricua Puerto Rican girl and
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
a couple African girls, a couple girls from Haiti.
Mm-hmm.
We were wild and protected ourselves, because we kind of didn't really belong in a clique, you know.
Yeah.
So it was. I definitely. I don't know why it happens like that, but even growing up for me, it was the same way. I just refused to to participate in it. I never
Yeah.
sat down at lunch. I was always like table
Hopping
jumping.
around,
Yeah.
hopping around. And
But
I think,
so
I think that one of the things that really got in my way was I was extremely shy, you
you were
know?
such an introvert. Yeah.
I was an introvert.
I
I was
was an only
extreme.
child, so I was like,
So you were, yeah, you were a
I
table
had to
hopper.
go out and
Hmm.
find the info. I had to
Yeah.
go find the friends because they weren't
Hmm.
coming to me. As to
Hmm.
where you had friends seek you out. You
Hmm.
truly did. You had a couple girls that were like, man, I want to be friends with her. She's different.
Yeah, and that's, like Colleen, and we can talk about Colleen. Colleen was a fascinating character in my junior high school years, and I just was mesmerized by Colleen.
Yeah, I'd
She
love to
was,
read that piece.
yeah, I mean, yeah, I mean, like she was tall. She wore an afro with like one of those black power
Okay.
picks in her hair and
Yeah.
her afro, and she was stylish and really smart. I mean, I mean, like I liked everything about Colleen and I was drawn to her. But yet there was this cultural divide, like I couldn't just invite myself to sit with her at lunch or whatever. But in my lunch ticket crisis week, when Kevin Kramer had taken my lunch tickets, and I was going without lunch, that was the week that Colleen kind of came and rescued me. So, yeah,
She kind of like handed you back your power. Like, I'm going
yeah,
to buy you lunch. You're going to be okay.
hmm, yeah,
You got this.
yeah, exactly,
Yeah. And we're forever grateful for her.
absolutely.
Uh, and so you always watched her, and I'm just going to read this piece.
Sure.
Leisha and I eat lunch together with a few other girls who don't think she's a slut. I look across the cafeteria and find Colleen. She is with her brown skinned friends. I hear their laughter and watch Colleen. One girl likes to say pussy, and the other girls squeal every time she says it. It's a powerful word. Colleen smiles and lowers her eyes behind her glasses. Her friends gather around her, and their table grows quiet when she speaks. I strain to hear what she's saying. I watch her lips and I watch her hands move with her words. I want to move like her, I think. She moves like water. I move like rocks down a hill. I come close sometimes. I move like white rapids crashing down the soccer field. I sway and tilt as the grass and earth give way under my cleats. I dig deeper with every step and every kick. Sweat chills along my back and thighs. I'm unstoppable. I carry my fury in my face and my feet. I kick, I turn, I spin, trip, and fly. This is my dance. This is my dance.
Mm.
I move like water here in the dirt. Hmm. At the end, uh, you're still thinking of Colleen as you sit with your dad,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
thinking of Colleen and water.
Mm.
Uh,
Yeah.
so your dad asks you, "You got a boyfriend yet?" Dad asks. I think of Leisha's breasts and Colleen's lips. No, I say, not yet. Dad nods. He looks relieved. We are quiet for a long time, except the snap of our shells. I think of Colleen again, and water. I remember my cleats and that $10 Dad has promised. I'll ask him for it later, I think, if we make a few more sales.
Yeah.
And so it's just a really beautiful glimpse into what 13 was like for you and the things that, I say this all the time, like we don't give enough credit to our kids. These kids, man, at 13, they are full fledged thinking on their own,
Mm-hmm.
having to exist in this world where they're not really taken, their word is not really taken seriously yet. It has no
Mm-hmm.
merit in the adult world, but you've got all these feelings and emotions, and you recognize all the same things,
Yeah.
that the adults do at 13, but we're not. It's not registered.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
Um,
it's really interesting because like even in my going through elementary school, there was the assassination of Dr. King. There was, there were all these assassinations, and the kind of the civil rights movement and all of that was happening. And going into junior high, there was still so much of that was still
oh
in
yeah.
was still in the air. And um I remember, and this comes up in another story, but like I had my first boyfriend in 8th grade. Alicia is still around. She's still my friend. And I liked him. I liked Michael Caron because, first of all, thought he was cute, but he was the only white boy I knew who gave the Black Power sign to his black friends in the halls. And that was enough of a reason to say yes to Michael Caron when he asked me out.
Hell yeah, it was.
Hell yeah, it was, because those were my sensibilities too,
Yeah.
and they continued through through high school and through what later became my political activism, in later years. Like the issue of race was always something that was near and dear to my heart. It was something I pondered a lot. It was something that I contemplated a lot in my introverted and my less than introverted years. So it was definitely kind of just something that really moved me to make many of the choices that I made throughout my life. So, and the awareness of class, to the awareness of making the choice, for instance, to mostly teach in Title I schools.
Hmm.
That sort of thing. It's like, why would I teach anywhere else? And yeah.
Yeah.
So it was really kind of those kinds of things were really formative during those years.
I think that's also why you chose like inner city schools when you lived in New York. It was like
Yeah.
this just makes
Yeah. Let me teach in
the
the
most sense.
yeah, teach in the South Bronx and in
Yeah.
Harlem. That's where I taught, you know, and even here, it's just kind of that's where.
Yeah, I mean, I know South Florida can be really rough for teachers. I mean, I say that with utmost respect for teachers. Um,
Mm,
I went to in my middle school, we had a teacher shot.
Yeah.
that rocked our school and
Yeah.
every child that attended that school to this day.
Absolutely.
Um,
Yep.
so yeah, it's like not exactly an easy place to teach all the time. And you do
Mhm.
have a plethora of kids, from very low income to, you know, Lake Worth
Mhm.
is kind of still segregated socially. One side of the railroad tracks to the other is a
Mhm.
different status,
Mhm.
economic status. Um, but we all got, molded together.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, I like South Florida for that reason. Does feel like more of a melting pot than a lot of other places. And I had moved to South Florida from New York City. And so the
Mm-hmm.
diversity was there in New York City, and it was hard for me to think of a place like I couldn't necessarily, I couldn't really live in a place that was all white. There would be something
Right.
really wrong with that picture for me.
I still feel like that in Tennessee. I'm like,
Yeah,
whoa, this is so strange.
yeah, yeah. It doesn't make any sense. Yeah. So I wanted to open it up for if Julie has a um, a story that she'd like to share that's related to what we've been talking about, or if Robin would like to share a story. I wanted to open up and let people jump in here. We kind of talked about a lot of different things.
Thank you so much. I'm Patty. When we started and everybody was coming into the room, we were talking about what's in a name.
Mm,
And so the first thing I thought about was that I know you as Patty. And I knew that Patricia was young Patty. And so it felt a little third person in the way that you were describing this young Patricia.
mhm,
And then when you started to tell the story of Leisha, I recognized very quickly that your Leisha was my Cindy, down to the T. And growing up in upstate New York in a small um, manufacturing town, um, Cindy was my Leisha in that um, I wasn't attracted to her, and I didn't recognize the feelings that I had at the time were of lust or whatever. The boys all talked about her because she had the same body type.
mm,
But now looking back, I think that I recognized that I was different later on in my years, because we're in the same time frame of when I discover that I'm having these feelings for girls. And I didn't recognize it until I look back now and think, when my relationships with my boyfriends ended, my friends who are boys, like it would be an argument or whatever that looked like. Um, it was like, go on to the next thing. But when I had an argument with one of my best girlfriends,
mhm.
um, the loss of that and the feeling of that, like it was just overwhelming
Yeah.
depression and grief.
Gave me
And
goosebumps.
I
Mhm.
thought it was normal. I thought it was normal. And so, and you're talking about Mr. Warner. I had my Mr. Warner was Mr. Clipple and the candy store, and how everybody had the responsibility of raising the children. If you got in trouble outside of the home, your parents usually knew about it by the time you got home.
Mhm.
uh, because they called each other on the house phone and said, your daughter was caught cursing at Clipple's candy store. But I'm just curious, how did you know at that time when you were having feelings for Leisha, since you didn't have anybody to talk to about it? How did you know that those feelings were wrong? Because I assumed that every young girl was having the same confusing feelings that I was having.
I think that it goes, there was a sense that I developed after I had my first crush. Like when I was 9 years old, I spent 5 days in the hospital, and my roommate at the time was a girl named Melody. And Melody and I came to love each other. Like I loved Melody, and we would share the same radio station, and I would bring her treats and sit by her bed and do all of the things that say a friend would do, but I felt very intensely for Melody. And when I wrote her a letter after I got out of the hospital, and I poured my heart out to her and basically said things like, I just couldn't imagine my life without her in it. Like I was very um, passionate about my desire to have her in my life, and these were emotions that were a little bit too much. Anyway, my parents, of course, I depended on my parents to send the letter, and they didn't. And that was a signal to me that my emotions and the way that I was feeling towards this girl were inappropriate. There was something wrong with these feelings I was having. And I think that was an early and very, very strong signal to me that the feelings that I had for other girls needed to be kept in check. They were out of balance, and there was something deeply wrong with them. And so that and also I grew up in a very religious household. So my mother was Catholic, my father was Baptist. And so we joke, Taylor and I joke about how it was the double whammy, both religion, the abomination of such things. And
The
so
Catholic guilt. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So that's I think that's how I think that was at least some of the reason why I felt that way at 13. Yeah. So there was an
That's very
awareness.
telling, and also very sad in a way. But
Mm.
I related so much to the chapter of Leisha and the beach, and
Mm-hmm.
how people treated her differently. Because I saw my friend go through the same thing. She developed very early,
Mm.
and you know, I thought that I was going to look like this small child, and so I wanted to be like her. I wanted to look like her, but I don't. I never asked her. We're still friends to this day,
That's awesome.
and I never asked her, you know, what kind of pain she was going through. Um, and I wonder now, what she thinks. I never asked her, but I think I might have to have the conversation about, when she found out that I was a lesbian in my older adult years, and through the powers of Facebook, because we live in different states.
Yeah.
You know, I never was attracted to her in that way. It would feel like being attracted to my sister.
Mm-hmm.
And so I never asked her if, she had wondered if I had feelings for her, because she was my best friend. She was my everything. And so I really enjoyed the story of Leisha, because I identified so much with that moment in time of Patricia's life.
Yeah, and and as well, she taught me a lot about breasts. I had a lot of breast trauma because I had developed these breasts and I didn't like them. And this comes up in the previous story of Weighty Matters, where and then people, girls start, like my sisters were all of a sudden mean to me, and I didn't want these breasts. Why are people, coveting my breasts so much? I would like to take them off and give them to someone. They kind of impaired my movement around, climbing trees and playing football with boys. Oh no, I couldn't, I felt like a part of my life was ending when my breast showed up. And Leisha kind of had a different perspective, and kind of taught me a little more balance about how to handle having breasts, in the way that if you're a breasty woman, which, which I was, but I would hide it, under t-shirts and so forth. And Leisha kind of was like, well, whatever, I'm just going to wear what I want to wear. And if people want to act like idiots, they act like idiots. And, and I kind of, so I was grateful for those kinds of, those kind of lessons from Leisha, who kind of took breasts, and having breasts in the world and how it changed people's perspectives. She kind of took it with a grain of salt, and I appreciated that. Yeah.
I love that. It reminds me of, like, my mom's fairly the same age. Would have been the same age. And I remember her, telling me the story of, fighting for jeans in high school, and the day everybody burned their bras. And my mom was super busty and was probably a lot like Leisha. Like, I believe that's how, I mean, all the guys lusted after her, same. But I think I learned, like, those lessons as her daughter, because I started, menses very early and started development very early, but kind of got stunted. But I always looked at my mom like, kind of grateful that I didn't end up like so
That's
busty,
busty. Yeah.
because I watched her struggle with it, and watched, like, the way women acted towards my mother, and
Yeah.
the uncomfortability, like, just like, it wasn't the same. It was a different interaction, even with women.
Mm-hmm.
So it never really bothered me that I didn't have big breasts.
Yeah, I think
For that.
I think our culture still has a long way to go in terms of,
Oh dear, yeah.
the objectification of breasts and what women have to
Yeah,
go
that
through.
goes so deep. Yeah.
Yeah, who have larger breasts or who have smaller breasts. Either way, they breast change everything. And
Or even the way women act about breastfeeding. Like, are you
exactly.
serious?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
not natural. I've been told it's not natural to
And
breastfeed.
that's kind of what kind of schizophrenic culture do we live in, where
But you can drink tit juice from a cow and a goat.
That's natural.
I have to be blatantly, raw about it, because it just,
because
we are so misconstrued in our minds. Like, it's so backwards, the way that we have objectified breasts. It's always a woman. Anytime I had posted a picture of me breastfeeding my child, just not, for attention, it's special. It would always be by a very busty woman. Like, you need to put yourself away and cover yourself up. And I'm like, but you have gigantic breasts and you post them all over the internet.
Right.
I'm feeding my child.
Right.
And it's different.
Yeah. Yeah. That's, it's kind of, that's the,
it's all just backwards.
Yeah. I agree. I agree. I want to just give Robin a chance to jump in here. If you have a story to share, Robin. Hey.
Hi.
Hey, Robin.
Hi.
Did you want to share a story this
morning? Oh, I love them lips, girl. Let me see ya.
Oh, let's get some light there. There we go.
There you go.
Yes, queen.
Hey, Robin. Good morning. So
many shades of lipstick, and I always reach for the darkest one. I'm like, they're not dark enough. They're not dark enough.
It looks so good on you.
Oh, thanks.
You are welcome.
Want to put my best face forward, literally, right?
Yeah.
I've been enjoying the glow up, though, literally. And as far as the breasts go, little ones don't get as much shame as the big ones do.
Total.
Trust me. Yeah.
You guys have to deal with way more shame than, like, oh, you have no boobs.
Yeah. So if you're catching grief from that, that's not personal. I mean, you clearly know that, but just know they just haven't dealt with those issues and come to terms with those things they have. Right, hanging there, weighing them down, Gloria Steinem's from, like, my hometown. So bra burning is near and dear to my heart.
Yeah. Yeah.
I like that you got a boyfriend yet part in the book,
Mm.
in the chapter. That's one of my favorite lines from your dad.
Yeah, and he looks relieved. Meanwhile, I'm thinking about, you know.
I'm thinking
Isn't
about
that
boobs.
funny?
What's that, Taylor? I'm sorry.
Meanwhile, she was thinking about boobs, Robin.
Yeah, and lips.
Yeah.
That's the way it goes. Sorry, your dad. Yeah. There's so many interesting questions I wanted to ask, but as soon as we got on, Taylor, when I missed the name and the meaning of the conversation, but I caught your story about your kids, and then you were talking about Lake Worth, and I had Mr. Bruno too.
Did you really?
Yeah. So what's crazy is I was totally confined to the peninsula that I grew up on, in suburb. It's called Point Place. It's a suburb of Toledo, and the creator of that 70s show is from Toledo. So there's
Okay.
really not a jump there to guess where she got that from. And it is really, really segregated. I had no idea, not at all, until I left. And when I left, I went from Catholic school. And the only time I ever left the peninsula was to really just go to the University of Toledo, where my grandma worked. So that was pretty much the gist of like my experience. And then I was dropped into Lake Worth Middle.
Holy shit, you poor girl.
Yeah. Culture shock, to say the least. They put me right in the front row. Mr. Gruner was the first teacher I had.
So this is 7th grade.
What's that?
This was your 7th grade.
So this was my 8th grade. They had a split at Lake Worth Middle into 3 groups. Two classes were academically oriented, and our class, come to find out, was basically the kids. They didn't know what to do with them all, so they just put them all into one building and then split them in half, with the ones who got decent grades and then anyone who had like behavioral or anything on their permanent record.
DOP.
Yeah.
You go to dropout prevention. Bye.
Freshman year, Lake Worth High. Yeah, that's what I had. I was like, what is this? Why am I in this class? But Catholic school, I stood out because of socioeconomic differences, we'll say. I don't know what else to say about that. You can kind of look back and see who got treated a certain way, and it had a lot to do with what street your family lived on and things like that. How well kept your hair might have been, or
for sure,
your clothes were. It was basically how much care you're getting at home, and things like that really played a part. And I had spent only 2 years in Catholic school, but the 1 year I had no demerits. But the second year I had one teacher who wrote me so many her hand must have gotten tired. I set a record for how many demerits could be written. So that 1 year led me to Mr. Gruno's class. And Lake Worth, it was a real culture shock.
You can appreciate that man's smile. I mean, as a teacher, that man, he did not see there was no differentiation between those students to him. When you were in Mr. Gruno's class, it was equal, it was equality, it was no one is lesser than the other. He was a special man who saw something more in every student than they saw in themselves. Yeah, it was he was the last teacher that told me to go to class that day. I was skipping school. I showed up to school to go start trouble, and then decided I want to leave. I'm going to leave. So I dropped my books off to Pilla and to my English teacher, whom I love. And Barry Gruno was standing in the hallway, and he was like, "Tucker, go to class." And I was like, "Yeah, okay." And I went and hid in the bathroom until the bell rang. And once you were out of class, when the bell rang, you got sent home because it was the last day of school. And I actually walked home with Nathaniel, walked part of the way home beside Nathaniel Brazil, because he had been suspended at the same time I had. And to this day, I think, like, what if I would have said something to him? Like, what if I could have calmed him down? What if I,
that day?
Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
But a friend from, one of my rich white friends' mom had just dropped her kid off and was like, "Hey, honey, do you need a ride?" And I was like, "Yeah, you know what? I'll take a ride home." So it was like I got this white privilege pass to not have to walk home with the rest of the kids that got suspended, Um, but to this day, I always wonder, like, what would have happened if I could have spoke to him. But it was
Well,
just
maybe
kind of
you
like
spoke to
the
him
pain.
just in the capacity that you were meant to speak to him.
I suppose so. I suppose so.
Otherwise, if you would have gone on that way, from what I've read about that day for him, he was on a mission, and that mission didn't end, and
No.
I was suspended from Lake Worth Middle for fighting, and
Thanks. My record, did you know Mr. Mascara? So Mr. Mascara was like, "Taylor, let me show you your record." And I had pages and pages and pages, and he just kept clicking the button on the computer. So, yeah, I was trouble. I was trouble for one of the white girls. I definitely caused a lot of ruckus.
Yeah,
a
kids
lot of
that
drama.
time usually are looked at as bad for teachers who don't have the time to, or the room in their hearts for it. Mr. Mascara is one who I do remember who used to take the time to talk. Yeah. Mr. Wasserman too.
Yeah, there were a lot of good ones there. I bet Patty's one of those kind of teachers too. Like already. Like that's why I think that's why her kitchen had always felt like like the counselor's room. Like we could all just post up in the kitchen and tell our stories about our traumas, and she'd be like, "Yeah, and just hold that space with us." It was like reminiscent of those days. I just need somebody to talk to about this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. Are you hungry?
Can I feed you? Mr. Mascara used to take us to Wendy's. Like, what teacher could do that now? Could a guidance counselor in 2021 take, 4 kids from the hood over to Wendy's and buy their lunch? Hell no.
Yeah.
But he made time for us. He was, he recently retired, but I was always grateful for his presence. That man showed up for me until my senior year in high school. I was in a play, and he actually came and watched that play, as did Miss Pilla. I mean, I had some good ones at Lakeworth Middle School. There were some teachers that were there for the right reasons and, really wanted these kids to go somewhere. Barry Gruno was definitely one of those men. There are kids on that basketball team, the ones that really struggled, and basketball was their only way out. Of Lake Worth. And they had the capacity and the capability to make it to the NBA, and he was going to coach them all the way there, but his life was taken too soon. It's a sad story, but a lot of lessons came from that at a very young age for a lot of students at Lakeworth Middle School. So yeah, definitely relatable as far as the way that things happen in middle school and the separation.
Yeah, you were talking about the age 13, and that's right when so many things happen from middle school to hormones.
Yeah, I agree. It's a really, really intense time, I think.
The most intense time of my life, of my young life, was 12 to 13.
Yeah.
Everything happened to me.
Yeah.
I've experienced the myriad of childhood to adulthood in that time frame.
Yep. Yeah, me too.
So when I read this story, it really brings me back, and I can see Patti, even though it was a different time and things were different. I can see you and feel those internal struggles,
Yeah.
I was also struggling with like who I was and what I wanted, even in partners, I was
Mm-hmm.
already sexually active at 12, 13 years old. I was not supervised. I ran the streets. I did what I wanted to do. And it showed, I was the kid that the other kids weren't allowed to hang out with. And, I was the bad girl. But also knew, like, at that age that I had already liked girls and had more experiences with girls than I had with boys by that age. And my mother had already found out about that too. The girl that I was obsessed in love with ended up getting taken away and being put in foster care right in front of my eyes. That was a rough one. My mom actually brought me to her foster home to spend time with her. And then you really see the way other people struggle. That was a big lesson for me too.
Yeah. Well, Taylor, it's that time again.
Yeah, it's been lovely.
For you to pick the story we're going to read next week, the themes we'll be talking about. So, what'll it be, my dear?
So, I really, since we've recently gone through, such an interesting time in our country, I thought that torches would be a good story.
Okay. All right.
Politically, we're in a day as it was back then also. So I think that would be a good one to jump to next.
Yeah. So torches is, we're going to jump into politics, my early experiences with politics, my experience with helping to put the very first African-American woman on the ballot in all 50 states, helping to be part of history that would not be recorded in the newspapers, but it was history nonetheless, and a part of history that I feel very proud of. And in this story, Torches, I talk about meeting Betty Hill, who happens to be the wife. She and her husband Barney were the first documented case of alien abduction. And so while just kind of going along my business, doing political work in New Hampshire, I happened to knock on her door and meet her and sit in her living room and have tea with her and talk to her about all manner of things. So there's a lot going on in Torches, as I try, there's always a lot going on in my stories, but so politics and aliens and topics like free will, and what what is a conservative and what is a liberal, and all of that. Those are all the things that I was learning back in my 20s when I was a political activist and trudging around in New Hampshire. So that's an interesting story. So we'll do that next week. And I want to, for those of you who have joined us in Facebook Live, thank you so much for joining us this week. If you have not already purchased my book, the best way to purchase it is on pattyluciawrites.com, where you can get up to 25% off. Otherwise, you can find it on Amazon or Barnes & Noble. You can buy the ebook as well. And you can follow all of these videos and other videos that I do on my YouTube channel, Patricia Lucia Author on YouTube. So Taylor, are you there? You want to come in? And oops, Taylor, I just lost Taylor. Anyway, thanks for joining us this week. Thank you, Julie, for your participation. It was so nice to have you with us today, and I will see you guys all next week.